Thank you. So we'll reconvene the meeting, Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners and Elko with video feeds to Reno and Las Vegas. We closed item 10 before the break and we'll open item 11, which is a series of reports, informational. We'll open with 11A, Tag Allocation Application Hunt Committee, Commissioner and Committee Chair Brad Johnston. The Commission will hear a report on the committee's recent meeting. Mr. Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Tag Allocation and Application Hunt Committee met yesterday at 2, and some items is that we went through some regulations that are in draft form, draft form, and these relate to some of the items that were previously discussed with the Commission. One was to have the NAC amended to have the PIW draw before the main or initial big game draw. The regulations to establish a uniform waiting period for those who draw bull-elk tag to 5 years, without regard to whether they're successful or unsuccessful in their hunt. And then also draft regulation for antelope waiting period of 3 years, and there was some discussion on that. I think it was my misunderstanding more than anyone's. What the draft regulation is going to propose is a uniform waiting period for antelope of 3 years. So right now there is no waiting period for those who draw an antelope tag and are unsuccessful, a 5-year waiting period for those who draw the tag and fill it. And the draft regulation will have a uniform waiting period of 3 years. My understanding is when we first considered it, it was just to take the 5-year waiting period of 3 years and not establish a waiting period for those who are unsuccessful. But I was misunderstood, and based upon additional public input and with the committee, the idea is that with the issuance of those tags, everyone should face a 3-year waiting period, whether they fill the tag or not. I think some of the sentiment was that these tags are issued as part of management tools. We don't want people to just not fill the tags and have no waiting period, whereas if you fill the tag, you do. So those draft regulations have been prepared. I think the next step is they'll go to LCB. And then hopefully when they come back, I don't know if they'll come through the committee again, but potentially on the agenda of the commission for workshop. We identified some key topics that will be on future agendas for specific evaluation. One of them is something that came from the Nevada Outfitters and Guides Association to allow non-residents who apply for the guided hunt draw to also apply in the main draw if they are unsuccessful in the guided hunt draw. There is a topic that has been on the tag list for quite a while on high points, high age, that in certain instances of certain age and residency requirements are met, whether or not there should be some sort of additional advantage in the draw. That has been up. It is currently weighted at 3, which means doubtful. But there has been some strong sentiment for that item, and so we're going to put it on the agenda for further evaluation and public input specific to that. The next one will be there's been issues of active military losing bonus points, a variety of reasons, not focusing on a big game draw when they're obviously out deployed or stationed elsewhere. And so we thought about ideas of ways that active military members would not lose their bonus points. The other one we're going to focus on too is bonus point eligibility. For example, if you apply for the spike elk tag, could you also apply for a bonus point for the bull elk, assuming you're eligible for that draw? Or similarly, where you have multiple hunts in other species, the ability to apply for bonus point if you put in for one of the other hunts. And that came from a member of the public. One of the other items we had a report from the department, and they were hoping that the TAC committee could take a look at issues, and that is, how do we address the specialty tags, bighorn sheep, and closing units, or making sure that units, the smaller units, don't have a significant impact by a series or a significant number of the specialty tags being used in those units. The department came up with 3 options, and we considered those, and the idea was we want to get this out to the public, for them to look at the 3 options, solicit the public for any ideas they may have. I think everybody on the committee as well as the department recognizes there's probably no perfect solution, so we're open to ideas. I'll be working with Endow staff to get that communication out to seek input from the cabs and other members of the public who are interested in potential solutions to that issue. And then one other topic came up about the order in which we set quotas, and that should quotas be set before tag applications are done. This was brought to the committee by Commissioner Morai, strategically, I think, at his last committee meeting. But there was a lot of sentiment on the committee that would make sense if you could have the quota set before the actual application process occurred. I think it would be a significant change. Mr. Wakeling commented that we should consider whether or not it has merit. And if it does have merit and there's public sentiment in favor of it, then start looking at the logistics of actually how you would do that. Because it would be a significant change when you think about the fact that quota setting occurs right now in May. And if you did the quota setting continually in May and had, let's say, applications in June, you would be getting results right on the cusp of some of the start of the seasons. So then the question is, would you have to move up quota setting, how that would impact the department's ability to conduct surveys and make its quota recommendations. So it would be a big change, but it was something that we are going to put on the radar screen, seek public input on that, and see where it goes from there. So apart from that, that's where the committee is headed on some big items, and then hopefully we are going to at some point in the future make some further recommendations to the commission, and then go through the TAC topic list one more time and identify any other issues that need further in-depth consideration. Given what we've bit off so far, though, I think we're going to be pretty busy with some of these items.
Okay.
Hopefully I cover everything. Mr. Valentine, Mr. Moore, I know Mr. Flowers and Mr. Kramer are also in the audience, are members of the committee. They can add to see if I missed anything.
Very thorough report.
So given the recommendation, are you willing to stay on the committee?
That's up to the new chairman.
I'm already pulling you back. Just a question. Additional committee member inputs or questions for Commissioner Johnston? One item that I had, Brad, and I've had at least a half dozen people talk to me about this in the last 6 months, and it keeps coming back up, is this concept of bonus point transfer, especially for folks who are getting up there in years and maybe can't get to the top of the rubies and hunt mountain goats anymore, but they have a couple dozen sets of bonus points. Has that gone through your committee? Has that been discussed? Is it on the topic list?
I'd have to review the topic list. I think it might still be on there, but it hasn't got much attention so far, but we can certainly consider it at a future meeting.
If you would at least let me know if it has been on the discussion. I haven't had a chance to look at the list, so.
I don't believe we've had any specific discussions of that item, but I believe it's still on the open topic list.
Okay,
I believe, but I'm not sure. I can let you know.
great, thank you. Additional questions? All right, seeing none, we'll close 11A and move to 11B, Administrative Procedures, Regulation, and Policy Committee Report. Commissioner and Committee Chair David McNinch. The Commission will hear a report on the committee's recent meeting. Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Administrative Procedures, Regulations, and Policy Committee committee met on June 13th. There's basically 4 things that are kind of floating around out there, a couple miscellaneous things, but primarily we have Policy 1, the general guidelines for the Commission. We'll be hearing more about it tomorrow at our second reading. If everything goes well, we'll be able to move that off of our list of things to do and put it on our list of things completed. And so that'll be one of the 3 rules of practice that we have to take care of. The other 2 have to deal with the appeals, where rather than adjusting policy right now, we decided to make some proposed changes to the NAC Those changes have been put together by the proposed changes by the committee, and have either been sent or on their way to the LCB for drafting, and that'll be brought back to the committee. And the reason why it's important to get that to LCB is so that if we could get an R number and close enough and get an R number, we would only have to go through the process one time, provided that the commission didn't make substantive changes to what was proposed. So that'll be coming back to the commission in soon commission meetings here in the near future. The other one had to do with the petition, the miscellaneous petitions, our petition process. We did have more conversation on it at the June meeting, committee meeting, and basically the same thing's happening. The committee did take action to recommend some changes to the NAC. That has been put together in a packet and is on its way to LCB for review and possibly getting an R number, and it'll follow the same path that the appeals did. Basically, the committee, the recommendations that you'll see from the committee on that had to do with right now we've got some challenges with the petition process. We've heard concerns from the public, and I think we've not necessarily struggled with it over time, but I think that there's been a need to have the conversation. Is there a more efficient way to do the petition process? And the 30-day aspect, we have 30 days to initiate rulemaking, has always been an issue. So there's been consultation with our DAGs, and the consensus was that what's gone forward had to do with when a petition comes into the department would do a review for authority, basically, with the DAGs, Deputy Attorney Generals, and determine does the department or the commission have authority over the issue being proposed for change, the regulatory change that's being proposed. Does the commission have authority? And if it does not, then there'll be a response sent back to the petitioner, notifying them why that is the case and why it's not going forward. If there's a determination that the department commission does have authority, it is something that can be done and can be accomplished by running it through the commission, then that will be brought forward to the commission, which initiates the process of rulemaking. So the agency would take 30 days to evaluate and determine if it's something that there's authority to do something about, and if it's determined that yes, the commission has authority, it'll be brought to us, and that initiates the rulemaking process. So it gets us away from this challenge of number one, is there authority or not being determined when it comes to us? Right now, it just comes straight to us, and we have that conversation here, and it delays the process in a sense, if you will. The other thing that would kind of alleviate is the times where we have these gaps of more than 30 days between commission meetings, and depending on when we get the request, the statute, the language indicates that there's a 30-day time frame, and we push that time frame, and by doing it this way, having that come to us from the department and the DAG, that creates the initiation of the rulemaking, and the DAGs are comfortable with that at this point in time. So we'll probably hear more back from LCB if it's a problem. Dave, Harry, do I need to cover any more on that? Does that make sense?
You're in the pipe.
All right. The proposal also would alleviate some of the pressure that petitioners that create challenges for the petitioners. Things like putting together business impact statements, doing some of the other paperwork that really is stuff that should be done at a later period if it's going to move forward. There's no sense. It's very difficult to put together a business impact statement. Number one, the folks that are petitioning generally don't have the resources to do it. There's really no specific guidance other than, what do you evaluate? It just leaves a lot of unturned stones. So that's something that really should be initiated by us and the agency, so that there wouldn't be that element. some of the other information that would be provided, I mean, we could go through it more specifically. It's going to come back to the commission. The bottom line is that we're trying to streamline the process. If somebody has an idea for a regulatory change, we want them to present it to us. And some of that administrative stuff we can take care of through the process, rather than trying to accomplish it all up front and then fixing it later. There's no need to do some of that stuff on the front end. So with that, Commissioner Valentine, Commissioner Grant, did you have anything you wanted to add with regards to the petitions?
You covered it good.
Petitions. Okay. All right. So the last thing that we worked on, that we discussed, the department had put together a draft policy for wildlife contests. And it was very simple. A little more than a page long, only because we had to have a signature block on it. And it was presented for basically to just hear comment and feedback from the public. And I've kind of generalized a lot of the feedback that we got. You know, it was very wide ranging. We had several interests in the audience, and we did have a wide variety of comments. So everything from don't manage the social / morale aspect of things. It's not our business. Stay out of it. To clarifying terminology. What do you mean by insensitive? What do you mean by ethical? There's a need to evaluate and/or incorporate science. How do killing contests impact the population scientifically? What's the benefit? There are aspects that were brought up that because people are paying in, that it might be some kind of violation of gaming laws, gaming commission. So the policy mentions that in order to, it encourages that there's a statement in here that talks about doing everything in a lawful manner. And because that might be an issue, who's going to validate that it's being done in a lawful manner when it comes to aspects like possible gaming commission violations? So these are some of the comments. Increasing enforcement to make sure all laws are being followed. Split the coyote contest. So a couple of the major issues that came out of it was actually regulating that aspect of, if you're not gonna ban it, consider regulating it and enforcing that people are doing it properly. There was a suggestion from a number of folks that spoke to split the coyote contest out separately from this particular one. The thought being that what was really being targeted were coyote killing contests. That was the primary issue. Primary concern of several of the people that spoke, and they wanted it split out. Leave the current one that was proposed in place for the chucker contest, the big game contest, things of that nature, because they felt like there was still some important components in there for those other contests, but to split out the coyote killing specifically and address it specifically, since that was the issue of concern. A lot of other comments, a lot of other things, and I think really what where we're at here is that the committee is going to ask for some conversation and some thoughts on where you would like to take it from here as a commission. And I think that that's really where we're at. So I'd ask again Commissioner Valentine or Commissioner Wallace to add anything that they think is relevant to help with that conversation here.
Mr. Wallace?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, in my view, to sit there and have 3 commissioners listen to the public comment and try and make adjustments to this policy to bring it forth to the commission and have 6 other members who probably have 6 other opinions, I kind of feel like it should be something that's done as a commission, and then we can weigh the comments of the rest of the commissioners to work on it, because otherwise I feel like we could go in one direction, bring it back to the commission, and the commission wants to go a completely different direction with it. And that's kind of how I felt, because, I mean, the comments in Commissioner McNitch, I mean, he hit it on the head. I mean, they were everywhere. They were all over the place. I mean, I even had some notes where I had some of the people that didn't like the fact that the contest involved money, yet they didn't have problems with a fishing derby that involved money. So, I mean, they were kind of contradictory within themselves as to what they wanted. And it's just it's so diverse, the direction that some people are really upset about it and others don't seem as upset about the contest as much as I felt like it was more about the killing of the coyote than it was the contest in some cases. Not all, but some.
Okay. Commissioner Valentine, anything to add?
And I agree with Commissioner Wallace's comments. And I don't want to sound like we're shirking the responsibility of the committee. It's just the three of us listening to the comments coming in. And I know there are going to be some different comments that come from a full commission versus three members on the committee. So with that being said, I think if it comes back as a separate coyote calling contest issue, all members of the commission should be involved.
Any questions for the committee members? Again, I appreciate the committee, and I guess I'll just share my thoughts on this for a couple reasons. One, there's been a lot of interest in wildlife contest policy. I think we've been discussing this for close to a year. I actually got a correspondence that had accused me of somehow hiding the fact that we were going to have a policy or discuss it because it was at the committee level. There was no intent on my part. In fact, I think I've stated that we were going to discuss it for 3 different commission meetings. So I find that curious, coming in an email from someone who hasn't attended the last 3 committee meetings. And I was also told that this body had no authority to develop regulations or policies, policies. And I pointed out that in our duties in NRS, the first 3 duties listed under the Wildlife Commission include broad policy. And so we can have a discussion on policy, but to have a discussion on whether or not we have the authority to do so, in my mind, is laughable. And so it is my intent, as someone who will set one more agenda, that this will be on the discussion and on the agenda for August. And we'll see what the County Advisory Board sentiment is, we'll see what the public comment is, and we'll see what the commission as a whole wants to do with it, and we will go from there. It's not going to be approved next meeting. As we know in discussing Policy 1 at our next or at tomorrow's meeting, we have a policy in place, or hopefully will, that indicates that we'll have a reading at one meeting and approval at the next. So at a minimum, county advisory boards and everyone else is going to have 2 bites at the apple to comment on it. So I just wanted to address the correspondence that I had received, give everyone a little bit of a thought on where we were scheduling wise. So don't be surprised when it shows up on the August agenda. Any other questions? Okay. Commissioner McNinch.
Not so much questions, Mr. Chairman, but there were a couple of suggestions from the committee that I'd be glad to download with you afterwards, and it had to do with one's kind of more. Well, I guess they're not quite substantive necessarily, but there were a couple of suggestions, and I can share those with you, and they can be reflected. They're on the public record from the committee meeting. But
I actually would like to do that. Any specific recommendations? Have that discussion at the next meeting, so
that's good. Okay.
It's agendized and everyone's hearing those.
So the committee will not address the wildlife contest policy at its next committee meeting, which we hope to do in conjunction with the August meeting, and we'll tackle some other issues, unless there's something specific that we need to work on with that. So.
Okay. Appreciate that. Anything else? Okay, with that, we will close agenda item 11B. Open item 11C, sage grouse update, Secretary Wasley. Director Wasley will provide an update on the status of sage grouse.
Chairman Drew, as I've reported at the last several commission meetings, the Fish and Wildlife Service rendered their decision back in September. The sage grouse was not warranted for protection via listing under the Endangered Species Act at this time. Most of the efforts of late have been spent on the implementation of the land use plan amendment that the Bureau of Land Management spearheaded in Nevada. Just over the past month, the Nevada Department of Agriculture and the Bureau of Land Management hosted some workshops around the state to engage with permittees, landowners, to help understand some of the provisions contained in that land use plan amendment. As recently as Wednesday, I was in Denver at the Western Governor Sage Grouse Task Force and further discussing implementation primarily with the federal agencies and other state representatives to make sure that there was consistent implementation through the West. I don't know if there is a sufficient amount of information to keep this agenda item on the agenda as a reoccurring update with the, I guess with your approval or direction, I would like to, in future meetings, include this as part of the department activity report going forward. A lot of the pre-planning that led to the not warranted has been reported on at historic meetings, and currently it's far more about implementation. And if there's any specific questions from the commission, I'm always happy to try to answer those or get answers from the commission. So future meetings, I think you won't see this reflected on the agenda as a standalone update item, but rather included in the department activity report. And certainly if there's any questions relative to the implementation of the land use plan or ongoing planning, we'll make that known. Also, there seems to be an interest in the biology of the species, the status of the species, and so in August, another item that we can have on the agenda in August is an update on lek attendance and population trends. Those data are still being processed and should be processed and summarized by the next commission meeting. So we will continue to provide those updates and also do that through the department activity report.
Questions for Director Wasley? Okay, just 2 points that I would make. Tony, I don't have any issue with rolling that into the department activity report. And then if we, from time to time, if something big comes up and we want to address it specifically, we can do it through the more specific project updates or listed on the agenda item. Just my 2 cents. And the other thing to point out in regards to sage grouse is that my term with the Sagebrush Ecosystem Council actually ends July 1st. And if you'll recall, Chris McKenzie from Carson City has been representing this commission as my designee to that board. I have not had a chance to talk with Chris about his desire to serve going forward, but I fully intend to do that as soon as we can get together and discuss that and figure out the proper mechanisms for making sure that seat is filled going forward. So just so everyone's aware of that. Any other questions or comments? Okay, with that, we'll close item 11C. Open item 11D, Department Activity Report, Secretary Wasley. Secretary Wasley will provide a report on recent department activities.
Thank you, Chairman Drew. I realize that we're going to be departing here shortly with hopes of having a little bite to eat and then running out on a field trip. But I'm going to provide my usual caveat that this may take a couple of minutes, but just like the presentations that we saw this morning, I think it's invaluable not only for the commission but the interested public and county advisory boards to understand what the department's working on. And for me, this morning we started off acknowledging the volunteer program and the efforts of some individual volunteers, individuals that have been volunteering for 40 years. Not only the economic value of that, but the service they provide in local communities. The Kirch Award, the Commission's Conservation Award, was given to an individual with a federal agency who fostered great partnerships, accomplished some great things for fisheries and habitat. We acknowledge the law enforcement officer as Officer of the Year through the Operation Game Thief program. We acknowledge the Employee of the Year. We looked at the duck stamp and upland game bird stamp projects, Finance Committee, Heritage Committee. We had a presentation on outdoorsmen and wheelchairs, restoration of a recreationally and economically important fishery, Cummins and Bassett Lakes. Looked at wildlife migration data, the crossing structures, and now we're going to go through a department activity report. And so tomorrow we're going to dive into some regulations, and we'll probably have things might get maybe less friendly maybe some more challenging discussions on where people are philosophically. And I think it's good to remember some of what we talked about today and some of what's contained in this department activity report, because as you're full aware, there's far more to this department, the people in it, than the regulations and some of the more socially and emotionally challenged issues that we deal with. So with that caveat, I'll try to quickly run through 6 or 7 pages of updates from each of our 7 divisions. Starting with the game division, 4 game division personnel attended the Northern Wild Sheep and Goat Conference held in early May up in Moscow, Idaho. Staff presented 3 papers, a couple in collaboration with Iowa State University and Washington State University. The papers dealt with disease transmission between mountain goats and bighorn sheep, some of what we heard earlier today, some of the graphs we saw from Cody Schroeder. There was a paper on Mycoplasma pneumoniae detection in mountain goat kids, and a third paper in collaboration with Colorado Parks and Wildlife that dealt with sinus tumors of bighorn sheep. Game division staff initiated an analysis of factors that have contributed to the spatial expansion and population increase of pronghorn in Nevada, especially as it relates to historical wildfires. Game and diversity staff are developing a presentation to be presented at the upcoming pronghorn workshop, which will be held in Montana in late August. An antlerless elk landowner hunt is likely to be initiated on the Winecup Gamble Ranch this year. The hunt is intended to discourage elk use on private irrigated meadows along the Thousand Springs drainage. 20 tags will be issued to the ranch to strategically remove elk when they're using the meadows. At the May 2016 Commission meeting, the Commission appointed an elk arbitration panel to hear the request for arbitration by a White Pine County landowner. The arbitration request will be heard this upcoming Monday evening on June 27th in Ely at the Mount Wheeler Power Boardroom, 5:30 p.m. Coincidentally, the amended elk arbitration NAC approved by the Commission will be heard by the Legislative Committee on Tuesday, June 28th. So with approval of that process will change, and we'll follow the new process following that arbitration on the 27th. Due to an oversight during the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources season setting process, the season structure for the interstate antlered elk rifle hunt in Unit 091, which is the pilot peak hunt, Box Elder County, is changed for 2016. Because hunters for both Utah and Nevada are eligible to hunt in both states when drawn for this hunt, the season dates typically are identical in both Nevada and Utah. In 2016, this will not be the case. Nevada Unit 091 season dates are authorized as September 10th through the 30th, whereas Utah's Box Elder Unit season dates were authorized as September 17th through October 7th. So Utah moved their season dates a little bit later. So there's some overlap in the middle. The Nevada season dates start earlier, Utah's go longer. Utah's commission will not meet again with adequate time to address this discrepancy in dates, but the game division will likely recommend an amendment to Nevada's season date to extend the hunt through October 7th at the August commission meeting. Skip that. A domestic sheep herder reported observing 2 bighorn sheep rams with a large herd of domestic sheep in Pumpernickel Valley east of Winnemucca. Endowed game biologists contracted with El Arrow to search for the rams. The Buffalo Mountains, portions of the Sonoma Mountains, and portions of China Mountain were surveyed, but no bighorn sheep were located. Eastern Region Game Division staff obtained diagnostic samples from elk mortality in Area 6. It was a cow elk. Radio collared during a 2015 capture. The mortality event is similar to a number of unexplained elk mortality cases that have been noted annually in Area 6. To date, the causes for these mortalities have not been isolated, although tests have been run for a variety of diseases and exposures, including anthrax. Wildlife health specialists participated in a steering committee meeting of the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Wild Sheep Working Group and Wildlife Health Committee. In a technical advisory group meeting with Wild Sheep Foundations. That was handled through Washington State University. Wildlife health specialists surgically implanted radiotelemetry tracking transmitters in 2 banded Gila monsters for the wildlife diversity study within the southern region. In addition, staff provided training in conjunction with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Desert Tortoise Recovery Unit staff to associated biologists. The training is required for certification to perform health assessments on free-ranging tortoises as required by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Recovery Plan. In the Fisheries Division, all of NDOW AIS stations are fully operational for the boating season in both northern and southern Nevada. So far this year, Lake Mead AIS staff have performed over 150 full decontaminations as well as performing inspections and decontaminations at several major bass tournaments. A new AIS station was set up this summer at Boulder Harbor on Lake Mead to better contact and assist local watercraft users. We had an AIS station set up here on Mountain City Highway early in the season, and we closed it several weeks ago due to safety concerns, and we've just completed an agreement with the property owner to reestablish the station on private property further off the highway to address those safety concerns. Good water conditions this spring have allowed us to purchase and stock channel catfish and wipers in a number of northern Nevada waters to enhance fisheries impacted by the drought, including Squaw Creek, Rye Patch, Lahontan, Chimney, and Jakes Creek reservoirs, as well as several urban ponds. The stocking occurred in late May and early June. Fisheries Division is working with the Habitat Division, Engineering Division, and a private landowner to develop a project to improve Built Creek Reservoir north of Winnemucca. Project options and preliminary cost estimates are expected to be completed by this fall. Annual trout spotting at Marlette Lake was completed this week and was very successful thanks to a good water year, maintaining flows in the Marlette Creek. Over 600,000 eggs were collected, including Tahoe rainbow, Lahontan cutthroat trout, and rainbow cutthroat hybrids. Habitat Division, a modular office was delivered to the Overton Wildlife Management Area to replace a leased trailer that burned 2 years ago. This unit replaces that leased office. It was December 2013 when that fire occurred. Implementation of the Greater Sage-Grouse Land Use Plan amendments by the BLM and Forest Service has resulted in NDOW handling over 122 seasonal habitat delineation requests to date. Memorandum of Understanding with the BLM clearly defining roles and expectations in coordination on sage-grouse management and coordination requirements under the revised plan amendment is under development with anticipated completion this summer. The Habitat Division held a statewide coordination meeting in eastern Nevada focusing on partnerships and projects. Field visits were conducted to multiple collaborative projects where agency resources were pooled to implement on-the-ground projects. There's no doubt that bringing the collective resources, funding, personnel, and experience of the agencies together is a model to influence landscape level change. Nevada Partners for Conservation and Development's Habitat Project Effectiveness Monitoring efforts are underway for 2016 with 3 to 4 person crews working at project sites across northern Nevada and in the bi-state sage-grouse population management units. Since 2010, the crews have surveyed approximately 1,450 separate plots addressing the effects of conifer thinning, post-fire reseeding, and targeted grazing on sage-grouse select sites. Statewide water development crew is fully staffed and has completed 6 volunteer projects in the north and 4 volunteer projects in the south since the beginning of the year, largely due to the assistance and support of some of our NGO partners and volunteers. From the Law Enforcement Division, Memorial Day weekend boating activity was slightly busier than recent years because of the renewed water levels. Eastern and Southern Nevada wardens contacted 252 vessels with 815 persons on board, issuing 82 citations and 186 warnings. We had 0 arrests for boaters operating under the influence and only investigated 1 boat accident. These numbers are very low for Memorial Day weekend, and we also assisted 27 vessels in need of assistance. Boating checkpoint was conducted at Catherine's Landing on the Arizona side of Lake Mojave on June 4th. This was a joint operation to detect boaters operating under the influence. Arizona Game and Fish, NDOW, and the National Park Service were cooperators. The checkpoint saw a total of 95 vessels contacted with 426 people on board. 46% of the operators admitted to drinking some alcohol. 20% of those that had been drinking were impaired by drugs and alcohol to the point of being arrested for the crime. 8 OUI arrests is much higher than we've seen the last 3 years for an operation like this. 2 of these OUIs will be charged as felonies since there were children on board, and that's an enhancement in Arizona. In addition to the 8 arrests, there were 33 citations issued for safety equipment and registration violations. Conditions were brutal for this operation as temperatures flirted with 120 degrees. Recent drowning at Lake Tahoe is another in a long series of cold water drownings at the lake. Many of these drownings involve fit, young people who were known to be good swimmers and otherwise healthy. We're partnering with other agencies at the lake, including the U.S. Coast Guard, California Department of Boating and Waterways, and several sheriff's departments in a marketing and public information campaign to highlight the damages of cold water shock that can lead to drowning. The majority of these problems are from paddle sport users that are not wearing flotation devices. We'll be conducting a statewide enforcement effort this weekend to detect boaters operating under the influence. This is part of the nationwide campaign called Operation Dry Water. We participated in this for many years. Since the inception of Operation Dry Water campaign in 2009, law enforcement officers have removed 1,875 OUI operators from the nation's waterways and made contact with over 600,000 boaters during the annual 3-day weekend event. A license fraud investigation was recently completed and sentencing handed down from a plea agreement in New River Justice Court in Fallon. The defendant had killed a bull elk and then filed a return card falsely stating he was unsuccessful. This shortened his waiting period from 10 years to 5. The very first year he was eligible in 2015, he drew another bull elk tag. Game wardens learned of the fraud, seized the tag prior to the season. The man was fined $500 and sentenced to 180 days of jail time, which will be on hold for 3 years and dropped with good behavior. The defendant's license privileges were ordered revoked by the court for 5 years, and during that time he cannot even accompany another hunter in the field. There is also a no alcohol clause for the 5 years suspension. Law Enforcement Division is moving forward with hiring process attempting to fill 6 game warden vacancies. As I said earlier this morning, when these 6 start employment in July, half of the field wardens in Nevada will have been hired in the last 2 years. Conservation Education Division, Free Fishing Day was held June 11th. On this day, anglers may fish in any public fishing water in the state without needing a fishing license or trout stand. NDOW, with the help of many local partners, hosted events across the state, including Sparks Marina, Idlewild Park in Reno, Boulder City Pond, Lloyd Land Park in Las Vegas, Echo Canyon State Park in Clark County, Cave Lake State Park, and Chinese Garden Ponds in Carlin. Each year, the Conservation Education Division makes it a priority to host a Hunter Education Volunteer Instructor Academy in order to provide training to volunteer instructors for their recertification. This year, volunteer hunter and angler education instructors from across the state gathered to engage in this training academy, which included topics such as proper caping techniques, urban wildlife interaction, advanced optics, archery, and bow hunting, among others. As the first fiscal year of this program draws to a close, the Conservation Education Division is evaluating data gathered by the Urban Wildlife Program. Through April 2016, 2,478 urban wildlife calls have been taken. 1,327 staff hours have been logged, and 13,936 miles traveled in support of urban wildlife activities. The 2 coordinators have participated in nearly a dozen meetings and given 10 educational programs. In addition to producing outreach materials on living with bears, living with coyotes, leaving young wildlife alone, and others, educational videos on living with bears and living with coyotes have been produced. So just as a refresher, the last legislative session, the department sought general fund contribution to assist with some of the urban wildlife demands. We didn't have the kind of record keeping that we now have in place, and so as we close in on the end of this fiscal year for which we've received funding, Con Ed has compiled those numbers, and it's pretty amazing to think that we've had 2,500 calls and over 1,300 hours spent dealing with urban wildlife issues. Nevada Wild, the agency podcast and radio show, just completed its 3rd season of production. The Wildlife Diversity Division, bird surveys that have recently been conducted include several breeding bird surveys statewide. Diversity biologists conduct these surveys annually as part of the National Breeding Bird Survey Network that monitors the status and trend of North American bird populations. Nightjar surveys have been conducted statewide, and in southern Nevada, southwestern willow flycatcher surveys are happening along the Virgin River with at at least 5 occupied territories documented. A rare black rail was also documented as part of these surveys. Flammulated owl surveys were done in the Clover Mountains, and burrowing owl surveys are being conducted statewide. Finally, 2 adults and 5 nestling peregrine falcons were banded in 4 territories, and feather samples were collected as part of our ongoing mercury contamination project that we heard about down in Las Vegas from Joe Barnes. In the Western region, biologists have initiated a study on pond turtles in Carson Valley. Over the past several weeks, staff have been trapping turtles at various locations, measuring and marking individuals with radio transmitters. Staff attended the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agency meeting focused on science needs for sagebrush-dependent species. The meeting was attended by BLM, WAFWA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and other state agencies. A list of 88 sagebrush-dependent species of mammals, reptiles, birds, and some amphibians was distributed. The list was then focused to a core group of sagebrush obligates, 8, near obligates, 15, that spend most of their life cycle in sagebrush. Of note, better biological and trend information is available for non-game birds and other guilds. Next step are to gather as much information as possible and consult state databases, wildlife action plans, and prevailing research to develop peer-reviewed document, and ultimately a request for proposal to conduct focused research. Lastly, from the Diversity Division, we hired a summer field crew through the Great Basin Institute to focus on trapping shrews throughout northern Nevada for the summer. These 2 biologists are using the shrew trapping protocol prepared by division staff. The protocol uses a mixture of trap types and focuses on live trapping of shrew species. In general, shrews are very poorly understood in both distribution and abundance in Nevada, and several species are wildlife action plan priorities. Lastly, from the Operations Division, the department is working with the Department of Natural Resources and Public Works to plan for the design and construction of a new joint natural resources office complex in Las Vegas. Presently, the department shares an aged, inadequate facility with the Division of State Parks and the Division of Forestry in Las Vegas. We've occupied the current facility for many years and have outgrown it. Furthermore, over the years, vandalism and increasing crime in the community has presented a growing concern for our employees as well as the public wishing to conduct business at that property. This planning effort for a new facility will bring together staff from numerous other conservation and natural resource agencies within the state under one roof, with much improved office and lab space, warehouse storage, expanded employee and state vehicle parking, and improved customer service for the public, especially since we do so many boat registrations and inspections. We're just shy of 20,000 vessels that come through that facility. In April, the department, I should clarify, we registered 20,000, not all of them come through for inspections, 20,000 at that facility. In April, the department concluded our annual big game tag draw. Again this year, we saw continued growth in the number of applicants. Over 65,000 applicants submitted, in excess of 229,000 applications for the main draw, exceeding last year by approximately 5%. Over 99% of these applications were submitted online. The department's in its early stages of developing mobile-friendly tag application and license purchasing capabilities for our 2 major websites. Once available, these enhancements will provide additional convenient services for our customers. Presently, our tag application process is available online and by paper, and our license purchasing services are available through our regional offices, over the internet, by phone, and through our network of 100+ license agents. Lastly, the 2016-17 electronic federal duck stamp is available today at NDOW offices through the department's licensing website at www.ndowlicensing.com, and from most of our licensed agents statewide. The electronic stamp will cost $27 and is valid for 45 days to allow for the receipt of the physical federal duck stamp in the mail from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. With this temporary stamp privilege printed on the license, the holder may hunt waterfowl under the same authority as if he or she were in possession of the actual stamp. This is the 2nd year that this privilege and this electronic stamp has been offered in this way. That's all I have. Thank you.
Questions for Director Wasley? Seeing none, thank you. We'll close item 11D.